Hej och välkomna tillbaka till Erik Penserbanks Healthcare-dag. Vi ska gå vidare i vår agenda och som då är fåtöljintervjuer. Och nästa bolag som jag ska prata med är Initiator Pharma. Men vi kommer göra intervjun på engelska, so I shift to English now. Very welcome, Klaus Elsborg Olesen, CEO Initiator Pharma. Could you start off with a short presentation of the company?
For sure, Ken, Klaus, and thank you very much for inviting me. So Initiator Pharma is a company that is dedicated to develop innovative drugs within significant unmet medical needs in patients, within the peripheral and the central nervous system. Right now we have two programs in erectile dysfunction, 2015 and 2018, and they represent paradigm-changing treatments of men that are neither non-responsive to the current therapy or cannot tolerate the current therapy. In addition to that, we are developing a 2015 compound also in neuropathic pain. We had some really strong preclinical data on that, and now we are actually with a phase 1 that we completed in a healthy volunteer pain study. We showed that there is also utility of this compound in the pain setting, providing relief to patients. So you can say in summary, what are we? What kind of company are we? We are a company that are at the clinical stage. We use our specific knowledge within these monoamine modulations to advance therapies to for patients in need, and thereby creating value to the company and to the shareholders of the company of Initiator Pharma.
And if we could go even further, what makes Initiator an unique investment?
You can say one of the things that is in pharma industry, where we know there's a lot of risks. So you can say that the more you know about what you do, the more likely you are of succeeding in the clinic. So you can say when we evaluate projects and also what we have done with the current assets, we look at things. Is it a target that is known? We target the monoamines, the modulation. That is something that's been proven for many years. That is something you can do. There's also been proven that some of the compounds that have been doing it have a bad profile, but here we have something that's very unique with our compound. Also, we are targeting indications where we know there's a direct link between the modulations of the monoamines and also providing relief both in ED, so in erectile dysfunction, also in the pain setting. So you can say that's a significant de-risking of the company, that we are working with something that we understand quite well, that we know the biology behind, and we know how it translates into the human setting. In addition to that, we are working with compounds that are very safe. We have shown that we can administrate them in a good manner, both in our phase 1 and our phase 2 studies now in many patients and volunteers. And we can see there's good utility. So for that, there's a significant de-risking of the company as a whole.
And as you mentioned, you have your pipeline consists of so-called monoamine reuptake inhibitors. Why is this drug class particularly interesting?
Yeah, it's as I mentioned, it's interesting because monoamines are important in many functions. It's important in emotion, it's important in sexual functions, some sort of specific sorts of memory, and also mood and so on. So here we know again that monoamines plays a really important role, and they have been used for many years for treating depression and also pain actually. But we know that a lot of the compounds that have been developed have focused on serotonin as their only component. And we can say we are developing the second generation of compounds where we have a different profile. We are still reuptake inhibitors, but we are focused more on dopamine, where dopamine has some really good effects in both in pain and also in the sexual dysfunction space that we are working in.
Yeah, and your pipeline, it's sort of in-licensed products or compounds, or you have acquired them. What kind of work do you do before you are moving them further into the clinical development?
Yeah, so you can say that the first thing we do, and we can use the asset now we have under evaluation, the option agreement we have for phase 2-3 ready asset. So we are looking again at these 4 cornerstones. Do we know the target? Do we have a molecule that we can safe administrate? Do we know the biology? Is there either clinical proof that this target will work, or do we have an animal model that is very translational, so we know it will work over there? Then is there a commercial potential in the current indication one is evaluating? And then also what's really important for us is that we can actually demonstrate that in what we call within a modest timeline and for a modest investment. So meaning we can set up a clinical trial where we can generate a proof of concept and generate efficacy data showing that actually we are moving the needle with this compound, because this is where we create the value. That's actually going in and saying this drug is doing something in this indication. That's where you say there's a significant inflection point in drug development. So that's what kind of what we evaluate things on when we do it, and so you can say all that we do before we take it to the clinic, because in the clinic it gets much more expensive, and a lot of the other things are a lot of paperwork, reading journals, reading old clinical trials, and that we can do at a much lower cost than just running trials.
And I mean, your focus on monoamine targeted drugs. Is there other companies out there that also share your interest in this class?
Yeah, there's many, and you can say there's actually you can say a local company here in Stockholm, IR Lab, is also focused on monoamines, and you can say they work actually within the same pathway, dopamine. They have a different approach. You can say that where we work with the reuptake inhibitors, they work with the receptor agonists, and they're advancing them in a little bit different indications we are. They're using them in Parkinson, the stability Parkinson, and they actually made a really interesting deal with the Ipsen on that as well. About a year and a half ago, actually on some of their data, $30 million up front, and I think $300 million in total for the whole program, and plus really significant royalties, low double-digit royalties. And I think that trial is going to read out, early next year, so it's good for them. But again, showing that monoamines have utility is actually still something that can be used for treatments of many things, and we are still just exploring what is it, because you can say that it works in depression, we know, but we also know there's a lot of side effects. About up to 80% of all women and men taking antidepressants have sexual dysfunctions, and you can say, well, what do you want to be depressed or have a sexual dysfunction? And actually, we can see that a lot of men actually refrain from taking the antidepressants because they don't want to have this side effect. So that's a problem that's not solved yet. So there's many things out there that we still can do within the monoamine space with a new wave of compounds that has a better, you can say, tolerability profile.
And talking about sexual dysfunction, your most advanced program is in erectile dysfunction, and IPED 2015. You have a phase 2b study ongoing.
Yeah.
Could you give us a little more color about the program?
Yeah, so you can say that we in the phase 2A we in the ED space, what we call organic ED. So this is what happens to men when we turn 40 and older. We get a gradual, physical impairment of delivering sufficient blood flow to the penile tissue upon stimulation. And here we can say that these patients, what we did in the first study, we took in moderate to severe ED patients, and we brought them in and we tested it with a RETI scan, showing them an erotic movie, and then we could see if it had any pharmacological effect of the compound. And that we have now transferred into, you can say, a more real-life setting. And the real-life setting is what we call an intercourse study. And it is a study that's designed that actually they go to the clinic 4 times and they get administered their drug, and then they can go home and have a sexual intercourse with their partner of choice. What we are doing here, instead of just looking at erection, we give them a questionnaire, which is one of the endpoints, pivotal endpoints, both in the registration of Viagra and Cialis back in the day, consisting of 15 questions that not only addresses can you get an erection, can you sustain it throughout the intercourse, but also asking very much to the circumstances around the intercourse. Did you feel aroused? Was there desire? Did you reach a climax? Did you ejaculate, or did you get to an orgasmic point? So these things are also important for the overall quality of the intercourse. Because again, what's really unique about the 2015 program is that we are strengthening the natural erection response. So you can say that a PD-5 inhibitor, Cialis and Viagra, they can only prolong an erection, but a lot of these men cannot get an erection. And with our compound, we actually stimulate the natural erection response upon stimulation. And when you then get the erection, of course, you should also have all these sensitizations of feeling aroused and having a desire and so on. They're really important parameters, and also why they are in the questionnaire.
And maybe you could say how many patients does not respond well to PD-5?
Yeah, so overall you can say that looking at the ED patients in general, about 30 to 35% do not respond to current therapies. If you look at, I would not say a sub-segment, because they sounds like they're small, but if you look for patients that also suffers from diabetes, it's more than 50% that do not respond to the current therapy. So you can say that there's quite a substantial number, because we actually right now it's estimated that it's probably more than 400 million men worldwide suffering from ED. We know that in the US and Europe, more than 20 million get prescriptions for ED drugs, and now we're actually getting some of the PD-5s are now over the counter, so you don't need a prescription anymore. And we can see there's an increasing use, so that maybe these numbers are not even representative for how many men is actually suffering from this.
And your ongoing phase 2b study,
Yeah.
as you described, has been a little bit delayed, but you have done some modification. Maybe you can just
Yeah, so
describe
we
what you
have we could see that, of course, what we always do. We don't know anything about the results coming out of trial, but we can see in the trials what is the exclusion of men relying on. What parameters is actually showing? Do they have a too good a response? Then we don't want them in the trial because that's not what we're trying to develop. But if we can see, as I said, it is men that are 40 and over, and of course they are not super healthy. Some of them have other complications. They could be, overweight, and it could be diabetes. It could be also cardiovascular complications. And you can say in that space, we need to make sure that when we do the trial, we try to get as homogeneous population as possible, because then it's easier to compare the results across the 2 dose levels that we try in this to get a better understanding of how the compound works. However, if it comes to the restrictions are so tight that you are missing too many patients that are falling outside the inclusion criteria, then the trial takes too long. So this is a delicate balance. You want to make sure you don't it's not about just completing a trial. It's about getting the result that you really can rely on. And what we looked at, we could see some of the criteria that they did not fulfill. And we have asked the authorities if they will approve us loosening in them a little bit. And we have taken the position that before they have been approved, we are not going to talk about what it is, because maybe we only get some of them. So when we get back from the authorities, we'll come back with that. It's been a little bit of a lengthy process. In the UK, they have been slow, so they have a backlog, and it's not only us, everybody else is sitting and waiting. But I'm pretty confident we'll get a positive answer on the majority of what we have suggested. And we have increased the compensation to the patient, and that's also helped for the recruitment of patients.
Yeah, and your best estimate when we could expect top-line data?
Yeah, so we came out with a press release saying we will finish the in-life phase in first half of next year. And then it takes a couple of months after the last patient is dosed. So, in best luck in the late summer, we will be able to come out with top-line data. But of course, we don't have that as a deadline. We actually work as hard as we can. We would like to get the data before that, of course, and time will show how well the recruitment rates go. But there is a bit of time after completing the study, closing down the protocols, and then do all the statistical work.
And if you have a positive readout from this phase 2b study, what would be the next step from your side? And does this phase 2b study support going into a pivotal trial?
Yeah, you can say so. What we are doing right now is it's not what we are going to do. It is what we are doing, because we are very active on the organic ED trial. Not only on getting the data, but we are also out there scoping out who is the potential collaborators that we could work with. How do we position this in the market? Is this it's been more than 20 years since the last product was approved within the PD5, with the PD5. So, can we still get the same endpoints approved by the authorities? So, a lot of this stuff is ongoing, and looking at what could be the compensation for such a compound when you're going forward. So, reimbursement, sorry. So that is something that we are doing now in parallel. We have good dialogues with companies of both, medium to larger size on what they're expecting to see. And of course, we are trying to teach them a little bit, because most of the companies, they don't have experts in this one, because they kind of been retired, all those folks that worked in this space. So we're trying to bring them back and saying, this is what's important. It's really important. Look at the whole questionnaire, but there's also some of these sensitizations around the intercourse is really important. And we believe, and with the effect of targeting dopamines, that we will also increase these, not only the physical parts of erection, but also some of these sensitizations part. So that's work we're doing right now. We have a lot of interactions with the clinicians that works at the larger sexual centers, bring them on board, showing them some of the data, both in the preclinical, show them in what they did in the phase 1 and the phase 2A. And so we kind of start educating on that there's a new paradigm in town, and it's going to come, in a couple of quarters with data. And we are very positive, because we saw real efficacy in the phase 2A in a really small number of patients that was moderate to severe. And now we actually go into a setting where we believe there will be much more effect of the compound. So that's something that we are working on now. So not only are we looking at what is the development path going forward, how do we get this registered, this compound, but also who do we do it with, or who potentially could have an interest in doing this together with us.
Makes very much sense. And then we could move over to your other ED compound, IP2018. You also have an ongoing clinical study. But first, maybe you can just give us an introduction. What is psychogenic ED?
Yeah, so that's so you can say that it has innocence on the same thing. It's still erectile dysfunction. However, the origin is very different. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we know that patients or men also suffering from depression, low self-esteem, anxiety, performance anxiety, and so on. They often have also an erectile dysfunction challenge and also depressed. Here, you can say that they are still fully capable of getting an erection, so the physical system is still working. You can deliver all the blood you need, but there's a psychogenic origin for this. Here, we are looking to see how can we actually both stimulate the natural erection response via the dopamine pathway, but also how can we, treat the underlying psychogenic origin of this. And this is why the compound 2018 has also a serotonin component. So again, cannibalizing or using the story that we know from the antidepressants, that increasing the serotonin levels is helpful for these things, but not so much that we don't bring up the dopamine at the same time. So we make sure we retain the sexual or the increase of the erection response in these patients. So it is a different group. It's a group that has, you can say, it's different because they can be very young and they can also be middle-aged men that are still healthy, but it is with a different background. So that's in this one we are doing a trial similar to the phase 2A we did for IP 2015. We are doing a triple crossover with the erotic movie stimulation and the Regiscan. And why it's a three-way crossover is that we run a placebo and then we run high and low dose levels of 2018. And this comes a little bit back to you can say, the mechanism of action of the compound. We know that too much serotonin, I said that in the beginning, is not good for erection response either. So we want to make sure that in this study that we don't overshoot with the dosing. So we actually have a high or a normal dose and a much lower dose, making sure we get the best result coming out of this, and also for future studies.
And this study you have almost all patients in. But what has been the challenge in recruiting patients?
Yeah, so here it is a very different patient segment that we bring in. It's men that have ED but also suffer from a mild depression or low mood, as is referred to in the UK. And these patients are, of course, the way the phase 2A has been done is that you go in and you get mounted with an apparatus that can measure the erection of the penis, and then you are shown into a dark room and you're shown an erotic movie, and then you either have a placebo and active before, and this creates some anxiety. You maybe feel that somebody's watching you because it is a dark room. So and as I said earlier on, anxiety is not good for the erection response. So we definitely know that this was also difficult to get patients to do that in the phase 2A in 2015, but it's been a bigger challenge in the 2018 study. So it's not an indication, the slow recruitment, that there's not a lot of men out there suffering from this. There is many, and we get many interviews lined up. But when we come into how we'll be conducting the experiment, we actually have you can say a lot of patients say, nah, that's not for us. So again, it's been proven more difficult to do, and of course, part of the study have been run during COVID. And one thing that men that suffers from low mood or depression is very much in need of is conversation with a therapist or with people, and that's not really been possible in COVID. There's been a lot of restrictions there. So actually, I think that there's been also pushing that many of the men that maybe could have joined this trial has kind of opted out. Yeah.
Okay. But, yes, the quick question then. This drug, could this also be something for women?
Yeah, so you can say that women and men are not completely identical, which is probably pretty obvious.
Yeah.
We normally say that men are easy to work with in the ED space because they are like rats, meaning that the biology that we see in the rats and the mice that we have used in the preclinical model is fully translatable. So what we see with the PD5 and other compounds that have worked on the erection is translatable. So it's easy. Whereas women, you can say, first of all, we have pre- and post-menopausal women. We also have the rhythm during the month. And this is actually giving a lot of complications because it's a lot of hormones interacting in these spaces that are also playing a role in the, you can say, the sexual response. But overall, you can say that we know there is an unmet medical need in women. It's not something that is talked so much about. We see more now in the recent years that we've been more liberated to talk about this. But there's just as many women suffering from what we call FSDs, or female sexual dysfunction. And also, this covers a very broad term, because on the men it's easy to see if they do not have an erection. This is much more difficult with women, but it ranges from some women going from pain, dryness, that you can actually lubricate yourself out of, but then also, the lack of interest, desire is a big thing. So definitely there's a need. We would love to see if we could develop something in this space as well, but right now we're focused on trying to make sure that we show proof of concept for the men, but we are of course looking for opportunities that could bring us into the other space.
Let's go to your third clinical program, IPTN 2021. If you could describe what you're doing there.
Yeah, so as I said in the introduction, the IPTN 21 is based on the IP 2015 compound. So when we acquired that, when 2015 is fully owned by us, when we acquired that asset, there was a data package showing that it had some effect in antidepressant models, but also had good effects in pain models compared to deloxetine, which was a drug developed by Eli Lilly that also worked in the pain setting, a good pain drug, but a pain drug that was mostly focused on serotonin and norepinephrine, and some of the side effects, blood pressure and other cardiovascular complications with these compounds. But they sold for $4 billion of that compound a year, $4 billion. So despite all these negative things, it was actually provided pain relief. So, but when we saw that this compound had the same profile, it was just as good, but with a very different, you can say, profile by having dopamine, a little bit of serotonin, and almost no norepinephrine. We thought, okay, this is odd. It's coming something that's very different from what we saw before. Can we show that this has utility in men? What we did then, we actually went back to and started looking in many clinical trials and results of these, trying to understand, does dopamine have an effect in some of these clinical trials in general in pain? And we saw that there is evidence of that. And that's also based on this research. We actually said we are going to go in with a program targeting in neuropathic pain, and we would like to exemplify a start out with trigeminal neuralgia, because that is an indication where there's an unmet need. We could actually really fast show generate a proof of concept that we can provide relief in these patients. And also dopamine has shown to be an important pathway in providing pain relief in these. So, but before we go into patients, you can say that now going from an animal model, and then we needed to see what was the profile or utility of 2015 in the pain setting. And we opted to do a healthy volunteer pain challenge study. And this is a study where you enroll 24 healthy men, and then you induce pain. You can do this in many ways with UV burns and so on, but we chose to do capsaicin, which is the active ingredient in chili, and we injected it intradermally, and it's like a severe bee sting. And then you run a whole pain battery of tests on them, trying to look at how do they respond to different pains. So what we call hyperalgesia and allodynia, trying to understand what is the different responses here. And based on that, you can say that you get out a lot of data. It's not you cannot say, oh, this is just going to work in this indication, but you get a good idea. What is the utility? How is the profile of the compound? How much PK/PD, how much drug levels do you need to have on board at certain times when you run the test? And what kind of sensitization do you get from the healthy volunteers in this? So we got out, they've completed that trial. We ran 2 doses of our 2015. We had a placebo, and then we used pregabalin. Pregabalin is a drug developed by Pfizer and approved in neuropathic pain. It does not work in trigeminal neuralgia. So it's a good compound to kind of benchmark. But not only does the model work, because it is a model that is run by many pharma companies, and you want to make sure you can kind of interpret the results. And we saw that it had really good utility. So we saw good efficacy of the compound compared to pregabalin. Pregabalin also works in this model, and that's good because we validated the model that way. But we could see that on allodynia, we reached the significant endpoints, and on hyperalgesia, we saw there was a dose-dependent effect, but we just kind of missed it on the 3rd digit that we saw the effect.
Okay.
And again, it's only 24 men, and what's really important is that you can say what's the downsides of running such a model. we believe, and we can see more and more evidence in the literature from the scientific community, that some of these neuropathic pains and chronic pains, we actually see that there's a plasticity of the brain, of the neurotransmitter, system. So there's actually a reduction of dopamine signaling in such patients.
Okay.
So of course we don't have that in the healthy volunteers. So you can say that going in and strengthening the dopamine will help more in patients that do not have the full reach of the system. So this is something that you can say it's new, not only to us, but the society or the science community in general, and especially in the pain setting. Mm-hmm. But we have shown the data that we generated in this to clinicians, both in Europe and the US, and they're very excited because they look at the curves and say, "Oh, you provide relief," and that's intentionally we show them that, and then we tell them the mechanism of action afterwards, and then they're like, "Okay, we knew that monoamines were important, but the dopamine one." So they're actually quite intrigued by this, and they all of the point that we know monoamines are good at providing pain relief, but there's so many side effects, and that's why it was really nice to coming out and having something with a safer or more tolerable profile. And this is exactly what we are doing with the IP 2015. So right now we are looking into what is it we potentially could do in the pain indication? Is it only trigeminal neuralgia? Should we include one more pain indication? And what's the rationale for doing that? But of course, before we can do all that, we need to convert the 2015, that was an on-demand drug, an ED, to something we can dose chronically. So that's the process we're in right now.
And that's why you're doing this pharmacokinetic.
Yeah, we do the bioavailability study, and then we'll...
Great. And you expect some data to emerge in Q1, I guess?
No, so you can, so we hope to, so the bioavailability study is a fairly short study because we just started looking at, the new, the optimized drug product that we have developed. Does it, work the way the first 2015 did? And we'll expect to have results in Q1 of that. It's a fairly easy study, a small number of healthy volunteers in that one, so.
And what could be the next step after that?
Yeah, I think that so what we'll do after that, then you would need to do a MAD study, so a multi-ascending dose, so we can give it chronically, and then in parallel to that, we are pushing really hard to again investigating: is it only trigeminal, or is there utility in other pain indications? So that's something that we are really looking at right now, trying to understand, where do we generate the right proof of concept? Because if money was unlimited, you would include many different indications. But we have to be smarter than just unlimited money. We keep a tight ship. We always done that. So that's the way we secure the company going forward. But we want to make sure we get something there that delivers result for the money we invest.
That sounds very good for the shareholders and good for everybody. And maybe we also could just talk a little bit about what the drug you are evaluating. I know you can't say that much, but maybe you can give us an update where you are and when we could expect some decision.
Yeah. So the option that we signed for this phase 2/3 ready asset expires at the end of December. So now we say this is the end of this month. We are doing the last bit of work on this now, putting all the pieces together to take our final decision. So again, we're looking at the 4 criteria that I mentioned earlier when we're evaluating these assets. And one thing that was, of course, you can say that I kind of skipped maybe a little bit is commercially attractive. But that also means that, what is the patent positioning? How strong is it? Is it something we can, is it something we can defend? Because that is also going to ultimately, it's no point of getting to an endpoint and show registration of a drug, and then somebody else can just use it, a generic one or whatever, based on the same ideas, right? So that's something that we are working on, making sure that the patent is there, and also we're still looking at what is the right trial to do. And then I think what's really important, of course, how much is that going to cost the company ultimately, and is it worthwhile? So these are the decisions that's coming up, and we will be in a position to take that decision and come up with that in before the end of the option agreement.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Looking forward to that. And maybe we could just step back to the company and give us a reminder about the team and what competences you have.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So you can say that we have always been a smaller team. So there's originally from the company we are about 6 people working in the company, but we actually use a good broad group of really experts in the fields that we need at the time, and it's something that we hire in. We want to hire the best, And if we needed to hire them full time, that would be too expensive for a company like ours. So we actually have a good network of hiring the world-leading experts for running CMC and other things when we need that. But in the company, you can say that we're starting out with this CMO and slash CSO, who's both behind the science and also the medic that is involved in the clinical trial, is Ulf Simonsen. He's a professor of pharmacology at the University of Aarhus. And he has a background in ED, so he's a really expert in understanding erectile dysfunction. He made some of the first animal models way back when he was a postdoc in Spain. So he is the key leader in these preclinical models. So he's the guy to go to, and his students and the people who's worked in his staff are very well invited speakers at the world's sexual dysfunction seminars and conferences worldwide. So he's a real capacity in this space. But he's a more than just in ED. Being a pharmacologist, he has this really strong background in understanding how drugs work, and also that's also why we're looking into the pain setting. So he's a really important part, both in you can say the research, making sure we do the right thing, but also translating that research into what do we do in the clinic. Then the person who's running the trials, and this is something that some companies that are running it now. At one point we had 3 ongoing clinical trials. We have 2 persons working on this that are full time working on this, and Michael is dedicated to doing this. Michael Thompson is running our trials both from the early start, from the preclinical development, the filing. That's him making sure we do conduct the trials the right way, and then we have all the drug product outside. He's responsible for that. He has more than 30 years of experience. He has an ex-ground. He was a global head of clinical pharmacology at Novo, was with Novartis, did his postdoc with the FDA in the US. So really, really strong capacity, and have been running many, many trials. So very much a hands-on. He used to be a hockey player in his youth, so maybe that a bit of a brute comes in sometimes, making sure we deliver. We have a window to do this, and of course gets frustrated when patients are not showing up and we cannot recruit. But that's our business, and we make sure we deliver in the business. Then we have myself. I'm also a co-founder, and then I have a research background. So I'm a structural biologist. Looked at a lot of understanding how transporters work, which we work with here. We also have Torgeir Våge, who's the CFO, an experienced biotech CFO, who's been with the company since the inception as well. So you say it's a really strong team. Most recently, we added Christina Guldberg. She came from Orphan Sign in Denmark, where she worked with a lot of orphan drugs indications, designing phase 2 trials. But what she's really good at as well is reaching out to KOLs, also key opinion leaders, patient organizations, making sure we get the feedback from the ones who's going to use these compounds at the end. And that is, when in trigeminal neuralgia, in the ED space, needing to understand what is it we ultimately. Which label is the winning label? What is it we make sure that says this drug is for this treatment at the end? And this is really important for the stage that we are in now, and it will help us in the business development going forward. So a really strong team, of course, supported by a strong management, board of directors. You saw Magnus Persson earlier today giving a presentation, but really seasoned people in the board as well.
That's very good. We are running out of time shortly, so maybe we just should sum this up. What should we look forward from Initiator Pharma in 2023?
Yeah, what really excites me is that we're going to have 2 clinical trials reading out. First, we're going to have the 2018, first time it ever is going to show data in these mild depressed patients. We are really confident that we will show something, and we are super excited to help these men suffering from this. Then we're going to have the same thing in the organic one, changing the paradigm. So actually going in and saying, we are going to win a label, not only prolonging the erection, but actually we can induce it. And I think this will change the landscape of how you treat ED. And not only maybe for the non-responders, but just in general, if we can also show efficacy on strengthening the overall sensitization of this, would be a super strong label to get. So very excited about that. Of course, I'm also excited about advancing in the pain space, but there's still a bit of a footwork we need to do that before we start getting results out of inpatients.
Okay. Yeah. Klaus, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tack.